I think there was some activity before that grant that really paved the way for it. There were some philanthropists in Grand Rapids. The ones I remember were Audrey Sebastian and Jim, her husband. And there were others. I think maybe Fred Keller was involved even as a very young man at that time. They were always asked to give money to local nonprofits through the United Way or other ways. And they raised some questions about the way nonprofits were managed. And they wanted to have more data about the nonprofits. How effective are they? Are their claims legitimate or not? That's what I remember. And as a result of that, a group of institutions joined together in consortium to provide aid to nonprofits in terms of management, and also set up some research capabilities so that these donors could really find out more about what was happening with their money. That's how I understand it. I don't remember all the details. I think they were rather interesting, but I wish I remembered them, but I don't. But there were many institutions, and some of the institutions that had centers in Grand Rapids, which of course, you know, the state universities all like to be in Grand Rapids. So some of them joined, the local colleges, the West Michigan colleges and Grand Valley. So it was a sort of consortium of a considerable number of institutions. I think if I took the time to enumerate them, I could come up with all of them. But we started that task. But Grand Valley was the one that persisted. It took money. As I remember, we all put in some money, and I think Grand Valley, I remember the budget saying, can we afford to do this? I said, we're gonna keep doing it. I put in another 150,000. I think the others fell by the way because they didn't want to put in the money, and there was no one at the institutions that really persisted. But we had a number of people, and I was very persistent because Grand Valley had been founded by the community leadership and the political interests of the West Michigan region. So Grand Valley had, and has always had, a strong tradition with the community, in the community, as community service, and interested in what the community is doing and responding to what the community wants. So that past helped us in that situation, and we just plowed on forward. So by the time Russ Mawby called the meeting of the presidents of the private and the public institutions that I don't know how many of us showed up, quite a number showed up to talk about his ideas of philanthropy, we were quite far along. And then as he persisted and wanted to fund the center, he could see that Grand Valley was farther along than the other institutions in providing the service. And I guess it was about that same time that we were really serious about a nonprofit curriculum. So these two just came together very nicely, you know, research for nonprofits, management consultant for nonprofits, and a curriculum to educate people to be good nonprofit managers and executives. So it all came together pretty well. And as that was coming together, the Kellogg Foundation, Russ particularly, could see what was happening here. And that's why he selected us, I think. So often, initiatives like that, when you're trying to get them started, a university will place them in an existing structure. That's usually fatal because that structure already has its purpose and understanding and interests. And it's pretty hard to do it. That's why we started a new kind of curriculum separate from what existed, and a new kind of research capability and consulting capability, which was outside of anything that existed. And I think that helped it to grow and sustain itself. You know, there are many people doing good work within an institution. They're not particularly interested in another kind of good work. They've got their agenda is full. They don't need it. So no, you don't always get a lot of support. And then anytime something new comes in, how much is it going to cost? Is it going to cost us money? Well, of course, when Kellogg came in with the big grants, that allayed that fear. On the other hand, we'd put some significant money into it before Kellogg did, and that was why Kellogg did, I think. And I just did some of those things. And there were others like the provost and the team, the administrative team, always could see the point of it. So we never had any real internal hassles over some of those new programs or those initiatives. And then we would kind of quietly just go about doing them.
Had you known Russ before?
Had I known Russ?
Yeah.
I had met Russ before, and we had been on one of the state organizations that I think he was pretty instrumental in bringing colleges and universities together, and so I had met him in some meetings there before this meeting. Yes.
Walking around, but not close friends.
No, we were not close friends. I always admired him because he was always trying to make the Kellogg Foundation significant without caring very much how significant he was. He never used all of that vast amount of money to aggrandize himself, as some foundation executives do. He just used it to do what he wanted to do. And he was always interested in philanthropy. That's my first memory of him, as interested in encouraging philanthropy, not being a head of a philanthropic foundation, but wanting everybody to get involved in philanthropy, because he understood, and this was an understanding that I shared with him, that America is unique and that philanthropy has always propelled the American agenda. And philanthropy was going to change as everything changes. And there were going to be new demands and new sources for philanthropy. Russ understood all of that, and he was trying to create the pattern for philanthropy in the future of America and how it was going to support America's future as it had its past. And that was, I just admired that so much about him. Dottie, about the time Dottie left the foundation chairmanship, which of course she had created it, created the Council on Michigan Foundations, and when she was ready to retire, I think it was about that time she was willing to come on the Grand Valley State University Board of Control. Now, my contact with Dottie goes back to the time we came here in 1969, and Paul Johnson was on the board, and then for years Paul was chair of the board. So the Grand Haven crew, then the Johnsons, were all not only known to me and were board members and contributors, they became personal friends. And so we always knew each other and knew what was happening and what was going on. And so it was a great synergy, isn't it? Here you've got the Johnsons, who were very much involved in Grand Valley from the very beginning. You've got Dottie founding the Michigan Council of Foundations and then being on the Kellogg Foundation board. Now, some might say that, it was sort of interlocking directorates. But when she was ready to retire, this achievement, which wasn't it one of the first in the nation, the first time that there was a council of foundations in a state. So this is a remarkable achievement. Again, a pattern setting for philanthropy in the United States. So again, she and Russ Mawby at the same time, living at the same time and dealing with the same issue in such a forceful and creative and successful way. So when she wanted to retire, the people who were deeply involved in foundations and the people who were on our board wanted to do something to honor her. And because of her connections to Grand Valley, and because we did have this philanthropic curriculum and research and consulting arm, it was quite natural that they would look to Grand Valley for being the place that they would honor Dottie Johnson. And so they did, and that's how the endowment was raised and the library given, and knowing that the library or the publications in the field of philanthropy don't begin to compare in number or depth of research in terms of length of time as history or literature or chemistry, or anything like that. The people who were interested in honoring her knew that there needed to be a library. There needed to be philanthropic publications and documentations. There needed to be that whole arm of philanthropy developed. And so it was natural to name that aspect of the center for her and to name the whole center for her. I'm not so sure I'm the right person to talk about how philanthropy works in Michigan. Grand Valley, when I came, was very much of a local institution. Local, more than Grand Rapids, but local West Michigan institution. Remained that way, and in some ways is still characterized and distinguished by its locality. So my fundraising was mostly in the local region. So I don't know too much about foundation philanthropy in Michigan, except as I followed Dottie's progress in putting the Council of Foundations together. And then we got very much involved with the Kellogg Foundation. And Ted Doan was very helpful, so the Dow Foundation, not like they do for other places, but they finally did some things for us too. So we did go afield a bit in soliciting money from others, but generally it was local, and that's what I know mostly about. And the philanthropy really stems from the very beginning of Grand Valley, where Bill Seidman and his colleagues and friends decided to try for a state university in their community. And they succeeded. And they succeeded because they were ready not only to put time and effort, but money into it. And so when I came here, that community base existed. And so that's what I built the philanthropy upon. And I and Joyce Hecht, and Joyce and I were a team from the very beginning, and that's what we did, and that was the base of philanthropy. So working the community and building relationships with people in the community is very important. I always, I made a rule for myself because I knew so many people here, and you know, a university president is a social being, at least should be, for success. So I see all these people who've supported Grand Valley or who could support at all kinds of parties and cocktail parties and meetings and all things. I made a rule for myself that I would never talk to them about supporting Grand Valley at any kind of a social function. If they asked me a question, I'd answer the question. But they knew they were going to get the ask when I made an appointment to ask. And then they could turn the appointment down or they could accept it. And I think that probably made for a better social life for Nancy and me.
I suspect so. You were invited to more parties, right?
And Dick Lax, who became a good supporter of Grand Valley toward the end of his life, he used to, and you know how loud he could be, he would shout whenever I'd come in a room where he had a cocktail party, "Hold on to your wallets, here comes Lubbers."
You weren't like that at all. Right then, right?
Not right then. No. This all holds together in a logical stream. We have many people here who are community oriented. It's a little stronger than in most places, or if it isn't stronger on an individual's base, there are more individuals who are committed to the community. So Grand Valley was a newcomer in the community, not such a newcomer anymore, but Grand Valley was part of community building. I love community building. My idea of a college where I was president before and coming here is the academic work is the responsibility and the mission of the institution. But it's accomplished if it's accomplished in a community. People who are accomplishing it feel they are in a community. And that gives a greater purpose to what they're doing. So it's that kind of a motivation that I've always had that fit very well into what was going on in Grand Rapids and Western Michigan, which is a great philanthropic area. But of course, I went to Hope College. I was brought up high school and college here, so I've understood pretty well the community and its philanthropic inclinations. So that's what it really was. My whole philosophy of fundraising and the role of a higher educational institution in a region and an area and a town was one of community. And here is a place that had a strong sense of community. So that was, I think, that's why it worked so well as it did. Well, I can talk only about my understanding. And there are so many paths to successful leadership, but I can just talk about how I feel. I think I, as everyone else, likes to be successful. You like to achieve goals and missions so that you feel that in your job, you've done something that's positive and recognized as such. If a person, I feel that way, I assume most every normal person feels that way. So what is the leader's how does that affect leadership? Well, if I want to be successful and I realize other people want to be successful and I happen to have a position that can facilitate their success, that's what I better do. Because the more successful they are, the more successful I'll be. So that has always motivated me. And I've always wanted everyone to make it. Now, some of them are in the wrong place and can't make it there. Unfortunately, some people have a neurosis quotient that's too high. But generally speaking, and the leader must deal with that too. You have to try to rid your organization as best you can. But I just always feel that everyone has dignity and everyone has ambition and everyone wants to realize success, and therefore, if I'm the president of an organization with several hundred or thousand people in it, then it's my responsibility to help them be successful as well as make myself successful. So I consider that probably the most, and you know, that's not such a a wonderful, generous, that's just a realistic. That's very realistic. And I made that work pretty well, I think. I think the second thing is that you must have a clear idea of where you're going. Now, I think too many people spend too much time on strategic planning. I've watched people and organizations strategic plan themselves to death. They plan and they plan. Once they've got the plan in place, they're on revising the plan. So I've not been a great fan. Probably I erred on the side of not enough planning, but we did our strategic planning. But the leader always has to have a pretty good idea of what he or she wants to accomplish. And I think I always did. I would be accused occasionally of not leading in a way that everyone knew exactly where we were going. Well, I didn't always know exactly how we were going to get there. But I always had a clear idea of what I thought we should do and where we should go and how we should make the institution work. Now, that does not lead necessarily to fixed ideas in your head. You watch for opportunity. Life moves. You don't create all the life around you. Life is created all the time, and you have to see what it is and where it's leading and what you should do. And then you seize opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities are presented by some people who have the means, who want something to happen. Now, that might not have been your top priority, but they want it to happen. And you help them make it happen at your institution. So that's another quality, I think, is you have to have your priorities. But your priorities should not keep you from seizing opportunities. That I think was very important. There's a third, and maybe this is more educational leadership, higher educational leadership. I don't know whether it would apply in corporate leadership. A leader really needs to live with ambiguity. You have to be able to live with ambiguity. You have to realize that your responsibility, your first responsibility, what you're getting paid for, is to make the institution run right. Not necessarily make every one of your convictions and beliefs be put on the table and say, hey, this is what I believe and I'm the leader and this is what we should do, or I think those people are wrong. Well, once in a while, of course, moral judgments must be made. But I think the leader, particularly in higher education, has to be very careful of how he makes them. His moral obligation is to students and faculty and staff who all are dependent upon that institution. And therefore the path for that institution must be the path that leads to the greatest success of all those involved. And so that's why sometimes the leader has to finesse things, maneuver a little bit, just to keep conflict from being destructive. Now that, talking about ambiguity, that in itself is not totally possible. There are exceptions to that. Once in a while, you must make a stand. And you have to decide. But that's what a good leader does, is knows when to make those decisions, to stand firm, and when to decide, let's try to smooth this thing over. That's probably, I'm talking about technique, but I've watched many leaders come on harder times when they're projecting their own beliefs at the wrong time. There's the right time to do it, but there's the wrong time to do it.
It's a real art to all of this.
It's an art. Administrative leadership is an art. No, it wasn't so much when I looked at your questions and I started thinking about philanthropy. First, why did I get into a job that made me seek resources? Why do people give money to things? Well, certainly people see a need, a hungry child, a crippled person, ethnic cleansing, and the fallout of that, and they see it, and their hearts are moved by that, and so they're ready to give to that. Some people, the worst side of it is always people who have a lot of money making sure that they give to a cause that maybe propels someone that they like and know forward. And that's not all bad either if the cause is good, but sometimes it's a very calculating reason to give money. And there's always probably a certain amount of self-interest in it. For instance, I was brought up in a college president's family, and my father always had to raise money so that the college could keep going. So how do I get interested in philanthropy? And then I follow him. I'm a clone. So how do I get interested in that? Well, this becomes self-interest. In other words, this is the way you make your living, by encouraging philanthropy, getting people to give money to you for your cause. But then you have to have a clear understanding of why you're doing it, and that you have to believe in your cause, that this is good. This is a good thing to do. So I never have to have any equivocation about asking someone for it. So, that motivation, you go out and you ask people for money and you sell them on your cause. So they're not necessarily moved by something they see, as they are convinced because someone convinces them that it's a good thing to do. And that's another reason for giving, I think. And so there are different reasons for people to give, but the American society has been propelled by it, and it needs to continue to be propelled. And I don't know what we're going through right now. We've had such a a concentration on economic power and wealth. One of the historians that I read says that many in history, sometimes religion is the dominant factor, sometimes politics is the dominant factor. Now economics is the dominant factor. And I'm just wondering about all this concentration on making money and these huge compensations that are paid to public companies. I mean, I think this person that owns something and they'll make as much money as they can make. They own it. But here are the public companies. And these people are getting golden parachutes that just boggle the mind when they fail. I mean, so we have, something seems out of whack here. And I'm just wondering, that to me is a bad thing. So how is that going to affect giving of money? How is that going to happen? One of the fact that our society allows for people to become wealthy allows for significant philanthropy too, even though the $10 and $25 gifts are important by millions of people to whatever cause. But our society is a society that helps and creates and endorses wealth, and that's great. But sometimes it gets out of whack. And I don't know whether that has any effect on philanthropy or not, but I hope it is not. I hope it isn't negative. What do they talk about now? These Section B corporations or whatever they're called. In other words, corporations adopt policies that they not only are making money for their shareholders, but some of their profits are to be applied to social good. Now that's a kind of countervailing movement to what we've been seeing in some of corporate America. So that's encouraging, that's hopeful, and I think that's something that we really should be, through a Johnson Center, be promoting the corporation, the B corporations, or whatever they're called. Well, yeah, my dad was always raising money. He became a college president when I was 3 years old at Central College in Iowa, where I became president 15 years after he left there to become president of Hope College. So it was just in the family, and my mother was very much a partner in all this. She did not pursue her own career, but it was obvious to me that the two of them were in a career. And she fulfilled many, many functions of that career. And so I just liked all that. And it's interesting to me that when I went on to graduate school in history and higher ed, and I always thought, well, it'd be nice to be a college president sometime. But then knowing that doesn't just happen. If you want to be an X-ray technician, you get trained for it. You don't do that in a college president. There are avenues to it. But I then started teaching history at Wittenberg in Ohio, and
World history or U.S.?
Pardon?
World history or U.S.?
I was teaching history and American history, and everyone taught the world history. I did some political theory too. The vice president for development left at Central College in Pella, Iowa, where my father had been president, and so the board felt they needed someone to come in there and pick up where he had left off, which was very good, but the school needed a little more emphasis on development. So they thought, well, maybe the kid can do like the father did. So they offered me the vice presidency for development. And I went there, did that for a year, and then the president took a job as a theological professor in a seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and so there was the presidency was open, and I was 28 years old. And so they committee. They brought some people in, some that I knew that I thought very highly of, but they couldn't convince them to take the presidency. And then the faculty signed a petition asking the committee to make me president. 8, yeah. So when I was 28 years old in June, they offered me the presidency, or I don't know when they offered it. I assumed the position in July of 1960 when I was 29. So
I suspect you were always old, right? Were you always a grown-up?
that's what my son-in-law says to my daughter. He said, "Your father's always been an adult."
So how long were you in Iowa?
I was president there for 8.5 years. And when I was 37 years of age, came to Grand Valley in January 1969. Stayed until July 1st, 2001. Well, I think people from other parts of the world are more philanthropy is being encouraged. Let me digress a bit. When I was president, the vice chancellor, which is synonymous to president of British University, from Kingston University, came over to Grand Valley. And one of the things he wanted to find out was how we raised private money. And in Britain, that was not a tradition. And he thought that was a pretty good idea. So over the years, he and I spent some time together, and he launched for Kingston University a real development operation, which continues to this day. So I would say to anybody who's looking at Michigan or Michigan institutions, they're viewing institutions that have been the beneficiaries of philanthropy for a century and a half or more. Michigan has had a highly developed philanthropic community. And that has come, look at Kellogg's, look at Mr. Kellogg, what he thought, how he thought of it. And then what the Fords did. You know, when they went public and they set up the Ford Foundation. Now that got kind of captured by the Eastern establishment, but you know, it's still Michigan, and it still has effects in Michigan. And so those are two prime examples. But there are more people. Kresge. Look at what Kresge did. You know, Albion College graduate, and he sets up a tremendous foundation. So Michigan, I think more than most states in the past, I think maybe not so much now, other states have done it, people in other states have done it. But I think if you look back to the late 19th and early part of the 20th century and the mid-20th century, Michigan had people who committed to philanthropy in a major way sooner than many others did. So I think this, you know, as soon as a society understands and commits to philanthropy, they will find themselves enriched and changed by it. And Michigan has had an auto industry that has its ups and downs, but the philanthropy of Michigan has helped some of its nonprofit institutions be sustained through difficult times as well as thrive in good times.